Hey babe, I am leaving now. She will not be a problem anymore. Claire was 7 months pregnant. She had just discovered his affair. And when she asked him to choose his family, he chose violence. He left her there to die. He drove straight to his mistress. He ordered champagne. But Marcus Wellington made one fatal mistake. He thought he had married a nobody. A simple interior designer with no family, no money, no power. He thought he could destroy her and disappear into his perfect life. He had no idea that his wife's real name was Claire Elizabeth Hartwell. He had no idea her family was worth $2.3 billion. And he definitely had no idea that her grandmother had been watching him for 3 years, buying his company piece by piece, waiting for this exact moment. What happens next will leave you speechless. A mistress with a secret that destroys everything. A billionaire grandmother with a plan for total annihilation. And a courtroom reckoning that strips a millionaire of every single thing he owns. Stay until the end. You will not believe how this unfolds. Drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from right now. If you love stories about women who rise from the ashes and burn their enemies to the ground, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss what is coming. Now let us begin. The phone call came at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Claire heard Marcus answer it while she lay on the cold marble floor, blood pooling beneath her cheek. Her vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like fog rolling over water. But she heard him clearly. She would remember those words for the rest of her life. Hey babe, I'm leaving now. She won't be a problem anymore. His footsteps crossed the living room. She watched his Italian leather shoes step over her body the way someone might step over a discarded newspaper. The front door opened. The front door closed. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire tried to move her hand to her belly, where her babies, though she did not know there were two yet, fought to survive inside her. Her fingers trembled against the marble. The cold seeped into her bones. She thought about screaming for help, but her voice had abandoned her along with her husband. This was not how the story was supposed to end. 12 hours earlier, Claire Morgan Wellington had been the happiest woman in Boston. She stood in the kitchen of their Beacon Hill townhouse, arranging white roses in a crystal vase, humming to herself as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. 7 months pregnant and glowing, she was preparing a surprise anniversary dinner for Marcus. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of building a life together. She had chosen the menu carefully. Seared scallops to start, because that was what they had eaten on their first date. Filet mignon with truffle butter, because Marcus always said no one cooked it better than she did. A chocolate souffle for dessert, because she had spent 3 weeks perfecting the recipe just to see him smile. The townhouse smelled like butter and rosemary. Candles waited to be lit. A playlist of their favorite songs was cued on the speaker. Claire had even bought a new dress, deep blue silk that draped elegantly over her pregnant belly. She felt beautiful. She felt loved. She felt safe. Looking back, she would recognize the warning signs she had missed. The way Marcus checked his phone constantly, tilting the screen away from her view. The way he had grown distant over the past few months, attributing his distraction to work stress. The way he sometimes looked at her was something that was not quite affection, something that felt more like calculation. But that afternoon, Claire saw none of it. She saw only the life she had built, the husband she trusted, the family they were about to become. Marcus texted at 4 to say he would be late. A meeting ran over. He would be home by 7. Claire adjusted the dinner timeline without complaint. She was used to adjusting. That was what good wives did, was it not? They accommodated, they understood, they waited. At 6:30, she went upstairs to touch up her makeup. Marcus's home office door was open, which was unusual. He always kept it locked. His laptop sat on the desk, screen glowing, and Claire would have walked past without a second glance if she had not seen her own name in the subject line of an open email. She told herself she would just look for a moment, just to see what it said. She was not a suspicious wife. She had never checked his phone or his email before, but something about that open door, that glowing screen, that glimpse of her name made her pause. Claire lowered herself carefully into his leather chair, one hand supporting her belly. The email was from someone named Sierra. The subject line read, "Read the Claire problem." Her heart began to pound as she read, She still does not suspect anything. Dinner tomorrow night? I cannot wait to see you. I have been thinking about what you said about starting fresh once this is all over. I am ready, Marcus. I am so ready to be Mrs. Wellington. Claire's hands trembled as she scrolled up to read the full thread. There were hundreds of messages, thousands, dating back nearly 2 years, pet names and promises, plans and photographs, financial transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lease for a penthouse apartment on Newbury Street, a joint bank account, a future that did not include Claire at all. She was not reading an affair. She was reading a replacement. For several minutes, Claire could not move. She sat in that leather chair, staring at the screen, feeling the world she had built crumble around her like a sand castle meeting the tide. Every memory shifted, every moment recontextualized, every "I love you" revealed as a lie. But Claire was not the woman Marcus believed her to be. She was not the simple, trusting, easily managed wife he had married for reasons she was only beginning to understand. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the shock and the heartbreak, a steel core awakened. She did not cry. She did not scream. She took out her phone and began photographing everything. Every email, every transfer, every message. She forwarded critical documents to a personal account Marcus did not know existed. She worked methodically, efficiently, her designer training serving her well as she cataloged evidence with the precision of someone preparing a case file. When she heard the front door open at 7:15, she closed the laptop and returned it to exactly the position she had found it. She walked downstairs on steady legs. She greeted Marcus with a smile that felt like wearing a mask made of broken glass. Dinner was quiet. Marcus complimented the scallops. He checked his phone twice. Claire watched him eat food she had prepared with love and felt something inside her turn to ice. She waited until dessert was finished. She waited until he had finished his wine. She waited until there was nowhere for him to hide and nothing left to delay the moment she had been dreading for 3 hours. Then she set her napkin on the table and spoke. "I know about Sierra." Marcus's reaction told Claire everything she needed to know. A guilty man would have denied it. A remorseful man would have apologized. But Marcus Wellington simply froze, his expression shifting from surprise to calculation to something cold and controlled. "What exactly do you think you know?" he asked. Claire recited the facts without emotion. The emails, the financial transfers, the apartment on Newbury Street, the messages planning a future that erased her entirely. She spoke calmly, clearly, the way she might describe a design concept to a difficult client. She had learned long ago that emotion gave men like Marcus ammunition. "I want it to end," she said. "I want you to end it with her. I want us to go to counseling. I want to try to save this marriage for our child." Marcus stood from the table. He began to pace, his movements tight and controlled. Claire recognized the pattern. She had seen it before in smaller moments, arguments about trivial things that had escalated beyond reason. But she had never seen his eyes look quite like this, flat, calculating, dangerous. "How much did you see?" he asked. "Did you copy anything? Did you tell anyone?" "I saw enough," Claire said. "And yes, I documented everything. It is in a secure location, Marcus. I am not trying to threaten you. I am trying to save our family." That was when his composure cracked. "Save our family?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There is no family, Claire. There never was. You were a means to an end, a stable wife to show the investors, a pretty face for the company Christmas cards. Did you really think I married you because I loved you?" The words landed like physical blows. Claire gripped the edge of the table, feeling the room spin. "I was 23, she whispered. "I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," Marcus spat. "You came to me with nothing. A failed interior design business, a studio apartment in Somerville. I made you what you are. I gave you this house, these clothes, this life, and now you think you can threaten me?" Claire stood slowly, her hand moving to protect her belly. "I am not threatening you. I am telling you the truth. We can work through this, but you have to end it with her. You have to choose this family." "Choose, Breton?" Marcus stepped closer. "You want me to choose?" Fine, I choose Sierra. I choose the woman who actually understands what I need. I choose the woman who is not going to trap me with a baby I never wanted. You said you wanted children. I said what I needed to say to close the deal. He was close now, close enough that Claire could smell the wine on his breath. You want to know the truth, Claire? My company is failing. The investors are circling. I needed a wife who looked good on paper, someone boring and predictable and controllable, and you played the part perfectly. Claire's voice steadied. Then give me a divorce. Let me go. You can have Sierra. You can have your investors. Just let me take my baby and walk away. Your baby? Marcus grabbed her arm, fingers digging into flesh. This baby is my insurance policy. Do you have any idea what it would look like if I divorced my pregnant wife? No, you are going to stay quiet. You are going to play the happy wife until I decide what to do with you. And you are going to delete whatever evidence you think you have. Claire pulled against his grip. Let go of me. Delete it. No. The first blow came without warning. The back of his hand connected with her cheek, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her face. She stumbled backward, catching herself on a chair. Delete it, he screamed. I will not. The second blow knocked her to the ground. She curled instinctively around her belly, protecting the life inside her with everything she had. But Marcus was beyond reason now, beyond control. He kicked her once, twice. She heard herself cry out. She felt something tear inside her. Warm wetness spread beneath her dress. Then he stopped. She lay still, barely breathing, hoping he would think she was unconscious. She heard him panting above her. She heard his phone ring. Sierra, yeah, I'm on my way. Order the champagne. His footsteps crossed the room. He stepped over her body like she was furniture. The front door opened. The front door closed. Silence. Claire tried to move. Pain radiated through her body in waves. The marble floor beneath her was slick with blood. She could not tell if the blood was from her face or from somewhere deeper, somewhere that terrified her to consider. She tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. The room grew darker at the edges. Cold seeped into her bones. She thought about her baby, fighting to survive. She thought about her brothers, whom she had not spoken to in years. She thought about the choice she had made at 22, walking away from her family's wealth because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her money. That choice had led her here, bleeding on a marble floor, abandoned by a man who had never loved her at all. Before she lost consciousness, Claire made herself a promise. If she survived this, she would never be powerless again. If she survived this, Marcus Wellington would pay. Then the darkness swallowed her completely. Ruth Chen had worked for the Wellington household for 3 years. She was 58 years old, efficient, invisible, and far more observant than anyone gave her credit for. She had seen the bruises Claire tried to hide with makeup. She had heard the arguments that echoed through closed doors. She had documented everything, sending weekly reports to a number she had been given when she first took the job. That number belonged to Margaret Hartwell, Claire's grandmother. Ruth returned to the townhouse at 10 past midnight, her shift starting late because of a delayed bus. The lights were still on, which was unusual. Marcus's car was gone. The silence felt wrong, not peaceful, but hollow. She found Claire in the living room, unconscious in a pool of blood. Ruth did not scream. She did not panic. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen difficult things in her life and knew that action mattered more than emotion. She called 911 first. Then she called Margaret Hartwell. It happened, she said quietly into the phone. He finally went too far. She is alive, but barely. I am sending you the location. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Paramedics worked quickly, their voices low and professional. Ruth heard fragments of their assessment. Pregnant woman, significant blood loss, signs of trauma, possible placental abruption. She watched them lift Claire onto the stretcher and carry her into the night. Before Ruth followed the ambulance, she made one more call. This one went to a number she had saved years ago, given to her by Claire during a rare moment of vulnerability. If anything ever happens to me, Claire had said, call my brother Daniel. Do not believe whatever Marcus tells you. Just call Daniel. Ruth had never needed to use the number. Until now. Daniel Hartwell answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Former Navy SEALs Ruth knew never fully slept. They just waited. This is Ruth. I work for your sister. Claire is being transported to Massachusetts General Hospital. She was assaulted tonight. It was her husband. She is in critical condition. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then Daniel spoke, his voice controlled and terrifying in its calm. Do not let her out of your sight. We are coming. 2 cities away, 2 brothers began packing without discussion. Daniel Hartwell was 36 years old, built like someone who had spent years turning his body into a weapon. He had served 4 tours in Afghanistan before leaving the military to run the security division of his family's shipping empire. He was patient, strategic, and utterly ruthless when necessary. James Hartwell was 34, lean where his brother was broad, with the sharp features of someone who had spent years in courtrooms. Harvard Law, top of his class, now the chief legal counsel for Hartwell Maritime. He had a reputation for being witty, even charming, but opposing lawyers had learned to fear the intelligence behind his easy smile. Neither man had spoken to Claire in nearly 10 years. The rift in the family had been painful and complicated, born from Claire's decision to walk away from the Hartwell fortune and the subsequent argument with their father that had severed ties. But blood was blood, and when it mattered, nothing else counted. They landed in Boston on a private jet at 4 in the morning. By sunrise, they were standing in the intensive care unit, staring at their sister through a glass window. Claire looked small beneath the machines. Tubes and wires connected her to monitors that beeped in steady rhythms. Her face was swollen, bruised, barely recognizable. Her pregnant belly rose and fell with each mechanical breath. James turned away, his jaw tight. Daniel remained motionless, studying his sister the way he had once studied enemy positions, cataloging damage, calculating response. A doctor approached them, her expression grave. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell, chief of obstetrics, and asked them to step into a private room. Your sister is in a medically induced coma, she explained. She suffered significant trauma, including multiple facial fractures and internal bleeding. We had to perform emergency surgery to address a partial placental abruption. Daniel interrupted. The baby? Dr. Mitchell hesitated. Babies. Your sister was carrying twins. We were able to save one, but the trauma caused us to lose the other. I am deeply sorry. The silence that followed was crushing. James covered his face with his hands. Daniel stood absolutely still, processing information that would have broken lesser men. The surviving baby? He asked. Stable for now. We are monitoring closely. The next 72 hours will be critical for both mother and child. And her prognosis? Too early to say. The coma is protective. Her brain needs time to heal from the trauma. If she wakes, when she wakes, recovery will be lengthy but possible. Daniel nodded once. I want a private security detail on this room. No one enters without being cleared by me. No one. Dr. Mitchell blinked. Sir, this is a hospital. My sister's husband did this to her. He is still free. Until that changes, she is protected like she is the President of the United States. Do you understand? Something in Daniel's voice made it clear this was not a request. Dr. Mitchell nodded. I will speak with hospital administration. When she left, James finally spoke. Where is he? I do not know yet, but I will find out. Daniel, James's voice was careful. We need to do this right. Legally, permanently. If we go after him emotionally, I spent 12 years learning to separate emotion from action. I am not going to touch him. Daniel turned to look at his brother. But I am going to destroy him. Every asset, every relationship, every shred of the life he built. By the time I am finished, Marcus Wellington will wish I had just killed him. James nodded slowly. Then let me handle the legal architecture. You handle the intelligence gathering. And we do not move until we have everything. Agreed. They stood side by side watching their sister through the glass. Somewhere in Boston, Marcus Wellington was celebrating with his mistress, believing he had eliminated a problem. He had no idea that the problem had just multiplied. The Hartwell brothers had come home, and they had come for blood. The next 72 hours were a master class in patient destruction. Daniel set up a command center in a suite at the Four Seasons, bringing in 3 of his most trusted former military operatives to assist with intelligence gathering. James transformed an adjoining suite into a legal war room, recruiting two senior partners from his firm to begin documenting everything that could be documented. Ruth proved invaluable. She provided 3 years of observations, recorded conversations, and photographic evidence of injuries Claire had tried to hide. She had done exactly what Margaret Hartwell had asked when she first placed Ruth in the household. She had watched, waited, and documented. "Why did grandmother plant you there?" Daniel asked during their first debrief. Ruth poured herself a cup of tea with steady hands. "Your grandmother never trusted Marcus. She had him investigated before the wedding, but Claire refused to listen to the findings. So Margaret did what Margaret does. She waited, she watched. She prepared for the day Claire would need help. And the information you collected? Sent weekly to a secure server. 3 years of evidence. His financial irregularities. His affair. His temper. Everything." James leaned forward. "Did Claire know you were reporting to grandmother?" "No, and she must not know, not yet. The reconciliation between Claire and Margaret needs to happen naturally. If Claire feels manipulated, she will shut down." Daniel nodded. He understood the delicate psychology of family wounds. "What can you tell us about Sierra Vance?" Ruth's expression hardened. "Chief Financial Officer of Wellington Technologies. She has been sleeping with Marcus for nearly 2 years. More importantly, she has been helping him hide the true state of his finances." "Which is?" "Catastrophic. The company is $40 million in debt. Marcus has been moving money around for years to hide it from investors. Sierra signs off on the fraudulent reports. They are both criminally liable." James began taking notes. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, potentially RICO violations if they have been doing this across state lines." "They have been." "Beautiful." James almost smiled. "What else?" "Marcus's investors pressured him to get married 3 years ago. They wanted a stable family man, someone they could trust with their money. Claire was selected specifically because she was unconnected, unambitious, and unlikely to ask questions. He chose her because he thought she was powerless," Daniel said. "Yes, he did not know who she really was. He did not know about the Hartwell connection because Claire had legally changed her name to Morgan when she left the family. He thought he was marrying a struggling interior designer. He thought he had found the perfect victim. He miscalculated." Ruth sipping at her tea, severely. Over the next 2 days, the brothers built their case with surgical precision. Daniel's team tracked Marcus's movements. They documented his comings and goings from Sierra's penthouse. They obtained surveillance footage from the townhouse, including the critical hours when the cameras had been manually disabled, a fact that proved premeditation. James's team pulled financial records, corporate filings, and communication logs. They obtained Marcus's personal emails through a legal subpoena based on the assault charges. What they found was damning. Not just the affair, but a systematic pattern of fraud that had defrauded investors of tens of millions of dollars. On day 3, they received an unexpected piece of intelligence. One of Daniel's operatives had made contact with a disgruntled former employee of Wellington Technologies. The employee, a junior accountant named Michael Torres, had been fired after raising concerns about the company's books. "He has documentation," the operative reported, "internal memos, emails from Sierra ordering him to adjust numbers. He was planning to go to the SEC before they terminated him and buried his complaints." Daniel authorized a meeting. Torres was nervous, terrified of retaliation, but when he learned who was asking, his fear transformed into something else. "Marcus Wellington destroyed my career," Torres said. "He threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry. He said if I spoke up, he would make sure my family paid for it." "We can protect you," Daniel said, "and we can guarantee that your testimony leads to federal charges. Are you willing to cooperate?" Torres looked at the brothers, reading something in their faces that reassured him. "What do you need?" "Everything. Every document, every communication, every piece of evidence you saved." Torres smiled for the first time. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask." On day 4, Claire showed the first signs of waking. Dr. Mitchell reduced the sedation gradually, monitoring her brain activity for signs of distress. The brothers took shifts at her bedside, maintaining the vigil they had promised themselves. James was there when her eyes finally opened. It took her several moments to focus, to process the unfamiliar room and the machines surrounding her. When she saw James, her first emotion was confusion. "Jamie?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the breathing tube they had removed earlier. How did you? Someone called us. James took her hand gently. We came immediately. We have been here for 4 days. 4 days? Claire's free hand moved to her belly. Her eyes widened with sudden terror. The baby? James squeezed her hand. The baby is safe. She is strong, Claire, just like her mother. Claire exhaled shakily. Then the other memories began to return. Marcus, the confrontation, the blows, the blood on the marble floor. He tried to kill me, she whispered. He left me there to die. We know, and we are going to make sure he pays for every second of it. You do not understand. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but her voice grew stronger. I documented everything. Before he hurt me, I have evidence, emails, and financial records, and we know about that too, Ruth told us. Ruth? Claire blinked. Ruth the housekeeper? Ruth the guardian angel, grandmother sent her. She has been watching over you for 3 years. Claire was silent for a long moment. Grandmother, she finally said. She knew? Oh, hi. She knew, and she is here. She has been in the waiting room since the first night, but she wanted you to be ready before seeing her. I am not sure I will ever be ready. Maybe not, but she is not going anywhere. James paused. Neither are we. Whatever happened 10 years ago, whatever Dad said, whatever wounds got open, that is over now. You are our sister. You are a Hartwell, and Hartwells protect their own. Claire closed her eyes, tears sliding down her bruised cheeks. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet but steady. Tell me everything. What have you found? What is the plan? James smiled. That is going to take a while, and you should probably rest. James, Claire opened her eyes. I spent 5 years being told to rest, to wait, to be patient. I am done being patient. Tell me the plan. So he did, and for the first time since she had walked away from her family at 22 years old, Claire Hartwell began to understand what it meant to have people fighting in her corner. For 3 weeks, everything progressed according to plan. Claire grew stronger each day, working with physical therapists to rebuild her stamina, while her brothers built the case that would destroy Marcus Wellington. Evidence accumulated. Witnesses were interviewed. The legal architecture James had designed was airtight and devastating. Then the first false victory arrived, followed immediately by a crushing defeat. James walked into Claire's hospital room with what should have been good news. The district attorney had agreed to file assault charges. An arrest warrant had been issued. Marcus Wellington was about to be taken into custody in front of the entire Boston business community at a technology conference where he was scheduled to speak. Claire allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in months. Hope. This is really happening, she said. He is actually going to be arrested. In approximately 2 hours, James confirmed. Daniel has assets at the venue. We will have video of the arrest. By tonight, every news outlet in the country will be running the story. And Sierra? Secondary charges. She will be arrested at her apartment simultaneously. Claire leaned back against her pillows. I spent so long believing I was trapped, believing he was untouchable. And now he faces consequences, like everyone should when they hurt someone. The arrest went exactly as planned. Marcus was led out of the conference center in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief, cameras flashing from every direction. The footage was spectacular. A powerful man brought low, exactly the kind of content that spread across social media within minutes. Claire watched it on her hospital television, flanked by her brothers. She allowed herself a small smile. Then she let herself believe, just for a moment, that the nightmare was finally ending. She should have known better. Marcus posted bail within 3 hours. 3 hours. $1.5 million paid in cash from an account no one had known existed. By nightfall, he was free. But that was not the worst part. The worst part came the next morning when Claire's attorney called James with news that turned their victory to ash. He is countersuing, the attorney said, and it is bad. How bad? He is claiming Claire attacked him first, that he acted in self-defense. He has produced medical records showing bruises on his arms from the night of the incident. He got those bruises while he was beating her. Maybe, but he also produced a psychiatric evaluation claiming Claire has a history of emotional instability, and he filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. She was in a coma, which he is characterizing as evidence of her mental breakdown. James, I have seen a lot of things in 20 years of family law. I have never seen anything this coordinated. He was planning this before he ever laid a hand on her. The media coverage shifted within 48 hours. The first wave had portrayed Marcus as a monster. The second wave raised questions. By the third day, major outlets were running stories with headlines like "Tech Mogul's Wife," "Troubled History Revealed," an exclusive interview, the woman at the center of the Wellington scandal. The woman was Sierra Vance. Claire watched the interview from her hospital room, surrounded by her brothers. Sierra sat across from a sympathetic anchor, tears glistening in her eyes as she spun a narrative that bore no resemblance to reality. "Claire has always been troubled," Sierra said softly. "Marcus tried to help her. He paid for therapists, specialists, everything. But she was so paranoid, so jealous. She saw threats everywhere. That night, when she attacked him, he was just defending himself." "And your relationship with Mr. Wellington?" Sierra lowered her eyes demurely. "We fell in love. We tried to fight it. But sometimes when you see someone suffering in a toxic marriage, Tani, you cannot help wanting to save them. Marcus deserves happiness, not this persecution." Claire felt physically ill. She is lying. She is sitting there lying on national television, and people are believing her. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. "Let them believe it, for now." "How can you say that? She is destroying me." "He is destroying me. Everything we built, all the evidence, is still there, and multiplying every day." Daniel's voice was calm. "Marcus thinks he is winning because he is controlling the narrative. But narratives are not evidence. Narratives do not matter in a courtroom. What matters is documentation, testimony, and proof. We have all three." "But what about my reputation? What about will be rebuilt after?" Daniel crouched beside her bed, meeting her eyes. "Claire, I need you to trust me. I need you to trust the process. This is not a sprint. This is a siege, and sieges are won by the side with more patience and more resources. Right now, that is us." James nodded in agreement. He is burning through cash to fight the charges and control the media. Every dollar he spends is a dollar we can trace. Every lie he tells is a lie we can document. Every person he pays to support his story is a potential witness who might flip. Claire looked between her brothers, seeing something in their faces she had not seen before. Not hope exactly. Certainty, the absolute confidence of men who had played long games before and won. "What do I do?" she asked. "Get stronger," Daniel said. "Get out of this hospital. Move somewhere safe and prepare for what comes next." "What comes next?" James smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. "Grandmother arrives tomorrow, and she is bringing the cavalry." Margaret Hartwell was 67 years old and had been running the family business since her husband's death 2 decades earlier. She had transformed Hartwell Maritime from a regional shipping company into a global logistics empire worth $2.3 billion. She sat on the boards of 4 Fortune 500 companies. She had lunched with 3 presidents. She had once reduced a hostile takeover CEO to tears with nothing but questions. When Margaret Hartwell entered a room, people noticed. When she left, they remembered. Claire had not seen her in 10 years. 10 years of silence, of distance, of believing she had been abandoned by the one person who had always understood her. 10 years of thinking her grandmother had chosen loyalty to Claire's father over love for her granddaughter. She had been wrong about so many things. This was simply one more. Their estrangement had begun with Claire's father, Margaret's son, who had tried to control Claire's life through money and manipulation. When Claire left the family at 22, Margaret had sided with her son publicly, while quietly ensuring Claire would never be truly unprotected. The deception had been necessary but painful. Now, finally, the truth could emerge. Margaret entered Claire's private recovery room like a force of nature contained in a Chanel suit. She was smaller than Claire remembered, her hair fully silver now, her face showing the years. But her eyes were unchanged, sharp, intelligent, seeing everything. Those eyes had negotiated billion-dollar deals. Those eyes had stared down hostile boards and predatory competitors. Those eyes had never once looked away from a fight. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Claire was propped up in bed, stronger now, but still bearing the visible marks of what Marcus had done. The bruises had faded from purple to yellow, but they remained visible, a map of violence written on her skin. Margaret stood in the doorway, cataloging the damage with an expression that revealed nothing and everything. Then Margaret did something Claire had never seen before in 67 years of knowing her grandmother. Her eyes filled with tears. It lasted only a second. Margaret blinked once, twice, and the tears were gone, replaced by the steel Claire knew so well. But that moment, that single crack in the armor, told Claire everything she needed to know about how much her grandmother truly cared. "Well," Margaret finally said, her voice perfectly controlled, "you look terrible." Despite everything, Claire almost laughed. "Hello to you too, grandmother. Do not misunderstand me. You are alive, which is more than that man intended. And you are fighting, which is more than he expected. But you do look terrible, and I have never believed in sugarcoating reality." Margaret moved to the chair beside Claire's bed and sat with perfect posture. Even in a hospital room, she looked like she was presiding over a board meeting. "So let us speak plainly. Would you like the full accounting of my involvement in your life over the past 10 years? Or would you prefer the summary?" "The summary, for now." "Very well. When you left the family, I respected your decision. You needed to find yourself without the weight of the Hartwell name. I understood that, even if your father did not." Margaret's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "When you married Marcus Wellington, I had him investigated. The report was concerning, multiple red flags, inconsistencies in his business dealings, a pattern of controlling behavior in previous relationships. I shared it with your father, who shared it with you." "I remember," Claire said quietly. "I thought you were trying to control me, like Dad always did." "I know, and that reaction was predictable, which is why I did not push harder. At that point, I had two choices: force a confrontation that would push you further away, or wait for you to see the truth yourself. You chose to wait. I chose to prepare." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "I placed Ruth in your household. She has been sending me weekly reports for 3 years. Every bruise you tried to hide, every argument she overheard, every red flag that confirmed what I already suspected." Claire felt her breath catch. "Ruth knew all this time?" "Ruth saved your life. If she had not returned when she did, if she had not called emergency services immediately, you would have bled out on that marble floor." Margaret's voice hardened. "Marcus Wellington left you to die, Claire. He stepped over your body and walked away. Ruth is the reason you are still breathing." The weight of that truth settled over Claire like a heavy blanket. She had suspected, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it had not been before. "What else?" Claire asked. "What else have you been doing?" "I monitored Marcus's business dealings. I discovered he was cooking his books, defrauding investors, building a house of cards that was destined to collapse. And I acquired a significant stake in his company through various shell corporations." Claire absorbed this information slowly. "You own part of his company?" 34%, acquired over the past 3 years through 7 different investment vehicles. Marcus believes his largest shareholder is a Chinese sovereign wealth fund called Pacific Horizon Investments. He has never met me. He has no idea who he has been working for. 34%, Claire repeated. "That is, controlling interest effectively. The other major shareholders are institutional investors who will follow whoever offers the best return. When I reveal myself, Marcus will lose his company in the same afternoon he loses his freedom." "Why? Why go to such lengths?" Margaret's eyes met Claire's directly. "Because power is most effective when it is invisible. Because I wanted leverage that could not be countered. And because I am your grandmother and no one hurts my family without consequence." Claire felt something shift inside her, old anger dissolving, replaced by something more complex. Gratitude. Grief. The recognition that she had never truly been alone, even when she felt most abandoned. "I spent 10 years thinking you sided with Dad, thinking you abandoned me, thinking I meant nothing to you. I know that perception was necessary. If Marcus had known about your connection to this family, he would never have married you, and we would never have gained the access we needed. I needed him to believe you were vulnerable. Isolated, easy prey. Margaret's voice carried a weight of regret. I am not proud of the deception, but I would do it again, every time, to protect you. So I was bait? You were a granddaughter who made a choice I could not prevent. I simply ensured that choice would not destroy you. Margaret reached over and took Claire's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. I am not here to justify my methods. I am not here to ask for forgiveness. I am here to tell you that you are not alone, that you have never been alone, and that Marcus Wellington is about to learn what happens when someone attacks the Hartwell family. Claire squeezed her grandmother's hand. She thought about all the years of silence, all the birthday cards that never came, all the holidays spent believing she had no family left. And then she thought about Ruth, quietly watching, quietly protecting. She thought about Margaret, building an empire of leverage, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. What is the plan? Claire asked. Margaret smiled, and for a moment, Claire saw exactly where her own steel had come from. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 67 years learning how to destroy her enemies without ever raising her voice. The plan, my dear, is total annihilation. I want to be there, Claire said. When it happens, I want to see his face. I would not have it any other way. He needs to see you standing. He needs to know that the woman he tried to kill is the one who destroyed him. Margaret stood, smoothing her suit with practiced hands. Rest now, build your strength. In 72 hours, we take everything from him. Grandmother? Margaret paused at the door. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. Margaret's expression softened, just for a moment, just enough for Claire to see the love beneath the steel. You are a Hartwell. We do not give up. We do not surrender. And we do not forgive those who harm us. She paused. Marcus Wellington is about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Claire lay back against her pillows, exhaustion and hope warring within her. For the first time since she had woken in this hospital room, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually win. Not just survive. Win. Just when Claire began to believe she might actually survive this, everything fell apart. It started with the bank accounts. 3 days after being released from the hospital, Claire attempted to access the savings account she had maintained separately from Marcus. She had kept it secret throughout their marriage. A small rebellion, a safety net she had told herself she would never need. $47,000 accumulated over 5 years of freelance work and careful saving. The account had been frozen. I'm sorry, Ms. Wellington, the bank manager said, his expression genuinely sympathetic. There is a court order, investigation pending. I cannot release any funds until the matter is resolved. Investigation into what? I am not at liberty to say. You will need to speak with your attorney. Claire walked out of the bank on numb legs. Marcus's lawyers had moved with devastating speed. They argued that Claire's assets were marital property, that she had no right to access funds unilaterally, and that her erratic behavior, their term for being beaten into a coma, demonstrated she could not be trusted with financial decisions. A sympathetic judge granted the freeze. One signature, one ruling. And suddenly Claire could not buy groceries. 24 hours later, it got worse. Claire returned to her apartment, a modest rental she had moved to after leaving the hospital, to find an eviction notice taped to the door. The paper was crisp, official, devastating. She had 72 hours to vacate the premises. She called the building manager immediately. There must be some mistake. I paid my rent. I have a lease. Ma'am, the building was sold last week. New ownership. They are not renewing any existing leases. Sold to whom? A long pause. I am not at liberty to say. But Claire already knew. The building was owned by a property management company that was owned by a holding company that was owned by Marcus Wellington. He had controlled her living situation without her ever knowing. Every month she had paid rent, she had been paying him. Every night she had slept in that apartment, she had been sleeping in his property. The realization made her physically sick. She sat on the floor of her soon-to-be former apartment, surrounded by boxes she could not afford to move, and tried to remember how to breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. The silence felt like judgment. Then her phone rang. Dr. Mitchell's number. Claire, I need you to come in today if possible. Is something wrong with the baby? A pause that lasted too long. Your blood pressure readings from yesterday's checkup are concerning. I would like to run some additional tests. Claire made it to the hospital in a daze. She sat in the examination room while Dr. Mitchell reviewed charts and asked questions and listened to heartbeats. The baby was moving. That was good. The baby's heart rate was strong. That was also good. But Claire's blood pressure had spiked dangerously, and her cortisol levels were through the roof. The stress is affecting your body, Dr. Mitchell said gently, and what affects your body affects your baby. If we do not find a way to reduce your stress levels, there is a genuine risk of premature labor. What are you saying? I am saying you need rest, you need stability, you need to stop fighting, at least temporarily. Stop fighting, Claire's voice cracked. My husband tried to kill me. He is stealing everything I have. He is trying to destroy my reputation. How am I supposed to stop fighting? Dr. Mitchell took Claire's hands in her own. I understand, believe me, I do, but right now your body is telling you that it cannot sustain this level of stress. Your baby is telling you. If you push yourself to the breaking point, you might win the battle and lose everything else. Claire left the hospital without an answer. She sat on a park bench outside, holding her phone in numb fingers. The spring sun was warm on her face, but she felt nothing but cold. Marcus's face smiled down from a billboard across the street. Entrepreneur of the Year, some business magazine's annual celebration of success. The irony was so bitter she could taste it. She had been beaten into unconsciousness. She had lost a child. She had lost her home, her money, her reputation. And now she might lose the only baby she had left, simply because the stress of fighting back was killing them both. For the first time since this nightmare began, Claire Hartwell considered giving up. Not giving in to Marcus. Never that. But walking away, taking whatever scraps he was willing to throw her, and disappearing somewhere far away. Starting over with nothing. Raising her daughter in anonymity and poverty, but at least raising her. Was that surrender, or was it survival? She was still sitting on that bench, still staring at Marcus's billboard smile when her phone rang. James's number. Where are you? He asked. His voice was strange, tight with something that might have been excitement. Outside the hospital. I needed air. We found something big. Can you get to grandmother's hotel? Claire closed her eyes. Jamie Chow, I do not know if I can keep doing this. The doctor says the stress is hurting the baby. Maybe I should just... Claire, James's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral. Listen to me. Do not say another word until you hear what I am about to tell you. What? Marcus is $40 million in debt. $40 million. His company is worthless. The profits he has been reporting for the past 3 years are completely fabricated. He has been defrauding investors, cooking the books, running the most elaborate Ponzi scheme I have seen since Madoff. Claire opened her eyes. What? We have the evidence. Daniel's people found a former employee who was fired for asking too many questions. He kept everything, emails, internal memos, original financial statements before they were altered. It is all documented, and that is not even the best part. There is more. Sierra is not just his mistress. She has been helping him cook the books since before he even met you. She is his CFO. She signs off on every fraudulent report. They are both going to prison, Claire. Federal prison. The kind where you do not get out early for good behavior. Claire felt the world shift around her. The billboard seemed to mock her from across the street. Marcus's confident smile suddenly looking fragile. Federal investigators have been building a case against Wellington Technologies for 18 months. James continued. They did not have enough evidence to move forward until now, until us. We gave them everything they needed. The arrest warrants are being prepared as we speak. But the countersuit, the media? Smoke and mirrors. He was buying time, trying to discredit you before the real charges landed. He knew this was coming. He has known for months. That is why he was so desperate to control the narrative. But it is not going to work. The FBI does not care about public opinion. They care about evidence, and we have buried him in evidence. Claire felt something stir inside her, not hope, exactly, but something adjacent to it. A reminder that darkness was not permanent, that even the longest night eventually gave way to dawn. There is something else, James continued. Something grandmother just discovered. What? We thought Marcus's biggest investor was a foreign sovereign fund, Pacific Horizon Investments. Grandmother had her people dig into it, expecting to find a Chinese conglomerate she could negotiate with. And James laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it sounded genuinely joyful. It is grandmother. Pacific Horizon is a shell company. She owns 34% of Wellington Technologies. She has been his biggest investor for 3 years, and he has no idea. She told me about that. Did she tell you what she is going to do with it? No. She is calling a shareholders emergency meeting tomorrow. She is going to walk into that boardroom, reveal herself as the controlling shareholder, and strip Marcus of his position, his stock options, and his reputation, all in one afternoon, while he is being arrested for fraud, in front of 200 investors and journalists. Claire let out a breath she had not known she was holding. He does not know? He has no idea. He thinks he is attending a routine quarterly review. He thinks he is still in control. James paused. Claire, I know you are exhausted. I know you are scared. I know the doctor told you to reduce stress, but I need you to find the strength for one more day. Can you do that? Claire looked at Marcus's face on the billboard. She thought about the night he had stepped over her body. She thought about the child she had lost. She thought about the child still growing inside her, fighting to survive. She thought about what it would feel like to watch him lose everything. One more day, she said quietly. I can do one more day. Good, because you are going to want to see this in person. The shareholders' meeting was held in the Grand Ballroom of the Four Seasons, a deliberate choice by Margaret that put Marcus in unfamiliar territory. This was not his conference room, not his building, not his turf. This was neutral ground, or rather, ground that belonged to the Hartwells without Marcus ever knowing it. 200 people filled the room, investors in tailored suits, checking their phones and murmuring about market conditions, board members pretending confidence they did not feel, financial analysts with notebooks ready, sensing blood in the water, and journalists, dozens of journalists, who had received mysterious invitations promising breaking news regarding Wellington Technologies. Margaret had orchestrated every detail. The seating arrangement placed Marcus at the front, visible to everyone, with no easy exit. The lighting highlighted the podium while casting shadows over the audience. The temperature was set 2 degrees cooler than comfortable, enough to create subtle unease without being obvious. Claire arrived early with her brothers, slipping in through a service entrance. She wore a cream-colored dress that matched her grandmother's suit, a deliberate choice, a visual statement of family unity. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow, but she had not tried to cover them with makeup. Let them see, she thought. Let them see what he did. Daniel positioned her in the back row, flanked by 2 of his security operatives. If anything goes wrong, they will get you out, he said quietly. But nothing is going to go wrong. How do you know? Daniel's smile was cold. On my mind. Because I have planned for every contingency, and because Marcus is about to have the worst day of his life. Marcus arrived at precisely 10 in the morning. Confident as ever, he wore a custom Navy suit and his best camera-ready smile, every inch the successful tech entrepreneur the world believed him to be. He shook hands with investors, clapped board members on the shoulders, made small talk with journalists he assumed were there to celebrate his success. He did not notice Claire in the back row. He did not notice Daniel's security teams positioned at every exit. He did not notice that the 2 men flanking the main doors were FBI agents in plain clothes. He did not notice anything because Marcus Wellington had spent his entire life believing he was the smartest person in every room. Today, he was about to learn otherwise. The meeting began normally. The chairman called for order. Routine business was dispatched quickly. Approval of minutes, review of quarterly projections, the tedious machinery of corporate governance. Marcus sat in the front row, occasionally checking his phone, waiting for his moment to present his expansion plans. Then the chairman cleared his throat. Before we proceed to new business, I have been informed that a major shareholder has requested time to address the room. Marcus looked up, confused. He checked his agenda, finding nothing about a shareholder presentation. He glanced at Sierra, who sat 2 rows behind him, equally puzzled. "This is highly irregular," Marcus said, rising partially from his seat. "I was not informed of any." "The request was made this morning," the chairman interrupted. "Given the size of the shareholding involved, the board felt it appropriate to accommodate." "What shareholding? Who?" The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Margaret Hartwell entered like a queen returning to claim her throne. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost more than most people's annual salary, and her silver hair was swept back in an elegant chignon. Diamond earrings caught the light as she walked, slowly, deliberately, down the center aisle. Every eye in the room tracked her progress. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Hartwell Maritime," and the whispers spread like wildfire. Marcus's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and dawning horror in the space of 3 seconds. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington was speechless. Margaret reached the podium and turned to face the room. Her expression was serene, almost pleasant, the expression of someone about to deliver very bad news to someone who thoroughly deserved it. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the ballroom. "For those of you who do not know me, I am Margaret Hartwell, chairwoman and CEO of Hartwell Maritime. I am also, as of this moment, the controlling shareholder of Wellington Technologies." The room erupted. Investors turned to each other in shock. Journalists began typing furiously on their phones. Board members exchanged panicked glances. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. 34% of outstanding stock, Margaret continued calmly, held through various investment vehicles including Pacific Horizon Investments, which, for those keeping track, Mr. Wellington believed to be a Chinese sovereign wealth fund. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in. He was mistaken. Someone laughed nervously. The sound echoed in the suddenly silent room. "I have called this meeting to address several critical issues regarding the future of this company and the conduct of its leadership." Margaret's gaze swept the room, lingering for just a moment on Sierra's ashen face. "Before I proceed, I would like to invite my granddaughter to join me on the stage." Claire stood slowly. Every head in the room turned toward her. She felt the weight of 200 stares, the pressure of this moment she had imagined 1,000 times in the past 7 weeks. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced them to move. One step, then another, then another. She walked down the center aisle, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, her bruised face held high. She did not look at Marcus as she passed him. She did not need to. She could feel his eyes on her, could feel his hatred and his fear radiating like heat from a fire. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and stood beside her grandmother. Only then did she turn to face the room and face the man who had tried to kill her. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished somehow, as if the exposure had already begun to shrink him. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something desperate and cornered. "Good," Claire thought. "Let him feel what I felt." 7 weeks ago," Claire said, her voice clear and strong, "I discovered that my husband had been conducting an affair with his chief financial officer, Sierra Vance. She pointed to Sierra, who flinched as if struck. Every head in the room turned to stare. Several journalists began photographing Sierra's reaction. "When I confronted him about this, he beat me. He beat me until I lost consciousness. He left me bleeding on the floor of our home and went to celebrate with his mistress. I spent 3 weeks in a coma." Claire paused, letting the words sink in. "I was pregnant with twins. Because of his violence, I lost one of them." The silence in the room was absolute. Someone in the back was crying, one of the female journalists, Claire realized. She pressed on. "My husband believed I was powerless. He believed I had no resources, no connections, no way to fight back. He believed he could destroy me and walk away without consequence." Claire's voice strengthened. "He was wrong about all of it. He was wrong about who I am. He was wrong about what I am capable of. And he was wrong about what my family would do to protect me." Margaret stepped forward. "Over the past 7 weeks, our legal team has compiled evidence of systematic financial fraud at Wellington Technologies. Falsified earnings reports spanning 3 fiscal years, misrepresented debt obligations totaling $40 million, securities violations that span multiple jurisdictions. This evidence has been provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Marcus shot to his feet. This is absurd. This is a hostile takeover. She is lying. They are both lying. Mr. Wellington, Margaret's voice was ice. I would recommend you remain silent. Anything you say at this moment is being recorded and may be used against you in federal court. You cannot do this. I will sue you. You will do nothing. Margaret nodded toward the back of the room, because the arrest warrants are being executed as we speak. The ballroom doors opened for the second time. 6 FBI agents entered in formation, their badges visible on their belts. The lead agent, a woman in a dark suit with steel gray eyes, walked directly toward Marcus with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Marcus Wellington, she said, you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, and criminal endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Marcus tried to run. It was pathetic, really. He shoved past the agent and sprinted toward the side door, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor. He made it perhaps 10 feet before Daniel Hartwell stepped into his path. Daniel did not tackle him, did not punch him, did not do any of the things Claire knew he was capable of doing. He simply stood there, 6 feet 2 inches of trained military precision, and waited for Marcus to crash into him like a wave breaking against a cliff. Marcus bounced off Daniel's chest and stumbled backward. Before he could recover, 2 agents had his arms pinned. The handcuffs clicked closed with a sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. That was foolish, Daniel said quietly. Then again, you have made a career of foolish decisions. The room exploded into chaos. Camera flashes strobed the air. Journalists shouted questions. Investors surged toward the exits, desperate to be the first to sell their suddenly worthless shares. Through it all, Margaret stood at the podium like a lighthouse in a storm, unmoved and unmoving. But Claire was not watching the chaos. She was watching Sierra. Sierra had not moved from her seat. Her face was white as paper, her hands gripping her armrest with desperate strength. She looked like an animal caught in headlights, frozen in the moment before impact. James appeared beside her, materializing from the crowd with a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Ms. Vance, I would not recommend trying to leave. There are agents waiting for you as well. Marcus made me, save it for your lawyer, but before you go into custody, I thought you might want to know something interesting. Sierra looked up at him, terror and confusion warring on her face. What? We received the DNA results from your pregnancy this morning. James's smile widened. Congratulations. You are having a baby, just not Marcus's baby. The color drained from Sierra's face entirely. She looked like she might faint. The father is David Chen, James continued, savoring each word. Marcus's business partner. I believe you have been seeing him on the side for approximately 6 months now, meeting him at the Mandarin Oriental every Tuesday afternoon, billing the room charges to Wellington Technologies as a business expense. The sound Sierra made was not quite a scream. It was something rawer, more wounded, the sound of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Marcus heard it. Even surrounded by agents, his hands cuffed behind his back, he heard that sound and understood exactly what it meant. His head whipped towards Sierra, his face contorted with rage. You were cheating on me? He screamed. I gave up everything for you. I nearly killed my wife for you. I think that is quite enough, sir. The lead agent nodded to her team. Take them both, separate vehicles. As Marcus was dragged past Claire, he stopped struggling for just a moment. He planted his feet and strained against the agents, his eyes boring into hers with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. This is not over, he hissed. I will destroy you. I will destroy your whole family. You think you have won? You have not won anything. I will get out. I will find you. I will. Claire stepped forward. The agents tensed, ready to intervene, but Claire held up her hand. She wanted this moment. She had earned it. She leaned close to Marcus, close enough to whisper, close enough that only he could hear. You told me once that I was nothing without you, that you made me. That I should be grateful you chose me. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. Do you remember what I said? Marcus said nothing. His chest heaved with impotent rage. I said nothing because I belied you, because you had spent 5 years making me believe I was worthless. Claire straightened, her voice rising so that everyone in the room could hear. But I was wrong, and so were you. I am Claire Elizabeth Hartwell. My family built an empire while your family was still selling insurance in Ohio. My grandmother has more power in her little finger than you have ever had in your entire life. And you are nothing. You were always nothing. You just had better packaging. She stepped back. The agents pulled Marcus forward. He was screaming now, incoherent with rage, every pretense of sophistication abandoned. He looked exactly like what he was, a small, pathetic man who had finally been exposed. The doors closed behind him, and Claire exhaled for what felt like the first time in 7 weeks. Margaret appeared beside her, one hand resting lightly on Claire's shoulder. Well done, she said quietly. That was beautifully handled. I have been practicing that speech in my head for weeks. It showed the line about Ohio was particularly devastating. Claire almost laughed. Oh, almost. But then she looked across the room and saw Sierra being led away in handcuffs, and something in her chest tightened. I almost feel sorry for her, Claire said. Margaret's hand squeezed her shoulder. Do not. She made her choices. She lived with Marcus's money, enjoyed his status, helped him commit fraud. She knew exactly what he was, and she chose him anyway. She was pregnant. So were you. The difference is that you had the courage to confront truth. She had only the cowardice to hide from it. Claire nodded slowly. The chaos in the room was beginning to settle. Journalists were interviewing anyone who would talk. Investors were frantically making phone calls. Board members were huddled together, no doubt planning their own legal defenses. What happens now? Claire asked. Now we let the system work. Margaret gestured toward the door where Marcus had been taken. He will be arraigned tomorrow. Bail will be set, high but not impossible. We will oppose release, citing flight risk. The trial will take months, but the outcome is not in question. How can you be sure? Because I have been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Every document, every witness, every piece of evidence. We did not just want him arrested. We wanted him destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. Margaret's smile was satisfied. His company will be worthless by close of market today. His accounts will be frozen by tomorrow. His friends will abandon him by the end of the week. And his mistress just discovered that the man she betrayed her future for was not even the father of her child. Claire looked around the ballroom, at the chaos, the fear, the dawning recognition on so many faces that they had been deceived by someone they trusted. She thought about all the times Marcus had made her feel small, all the times he had convinced her that she was nothing without him. She was not nothing. She had never been nothing. She had simply been waiting, without knowing it, for the moment when she could prove it. Grandmother? Yes? Thank you for everything, for never giving up, for waiting until I was ready. Margaret pulled her into a hug, an actual hug, the first in 10 years. It was brief and somewhat awkward, as if neither of them quite remembered how to do it. But it was real. You are my granddaughter, Margaret said. There is nothing I would not do for you. And standing there in the wreckage of Marcus Wellington's empire, surrounded by journalists and federal agents and 200 witnesses to his destruction, Claire finally allowed herself to believe it. The trials took 4 months. 4 months of depositions and motions and endless legal maneuvering that James navigated with the precision of a surgeon. 4 months of headlines and news segments and podcast episodes dissecting every detail of the Wellington scandal. 4 months of watching Marcus's carefully constructed image crumble like wet paper. Claire did not attend most of the proceedings. Her doctors were clear. The stress could harm the baby, and nothing was worth that risk. So she followed along through James's daily updates, through news alerts on her phone, through the occasional headline that caught her eye. But she attended the sentencing. That she would not miss. The federal courthouse in Boston was a monument to intimidation. Gray stone and high ceilings designed to make defendants feel small. Claire sat in the gallery with her brothers and grandmother, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter was kicking impatiently. The baby was due in 3 weeks. Claire had started to think of her as impatient for justice. Marcus Wellington entered in prison orange, his wrists shackled, his ankles chained. He looked nothing like the confident entrepreneur who had graced magazine covers. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. 4 months of incarceration awaiting trial had stripped away every pretense of sophistication. He did not look at Claire as he took his seat. He did not look at anyone. He stared at the table in front of him with the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had finally accepted the magnitude of his own destruction. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Chen, a woman with a reputation for harsh sentences in white-collar cases, entered and took her seat. The courtroom rose and fell in waves of rustling suits and settling bodies. The defendant will rise. Marcus stood on unsteady legs. His attorney stood beside him, expressionless, having already advised his client that there was no strategy left but acceptance. Marcus Allen Wellington, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 14 counts of securities fraud, 6 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit assault, and 1 count of assault causing grievous bodily harm. Judge Chen's voice was level, almost clinical. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything you wish to say? Marcus's attorney whispered something in his ear. Marcus shook his head once, then again. Then unexpectedly he spoke. I want to say something. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. I want to say that I am sorry for everything. I lost my way. I made terrible decisions. I hurt people who did not deserve to be hurt. He turned for the first time to look at Claire. His eyes were wet. I hurt you, Claire. I know that. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I did love you once in my own broken way. I did love you. Claire stared back at him. She felt her grandmother's hand close over hers, felt Daniel's protective presence on her other side. She thought about what to say, what she wanted to say, what he deserved to hear. In the end, she said nothing. She simply looked at him, letting her silence speak for itself. Whatever love had once existed between them had died on a marble floor in a pool of blood. His apology changed nothing. His tears meant nothing. His broken voice and wet eyes were just another performance, another attempt to manipulate, another lie dressed up as contrition. She would give him nothing, not even the satisfaction of her anger. Judge Chen waited a moment, perhaps expecting Claire to respond. When she did not, the judge turned back to Marcus. Mr. Wellington, the court has heard your statement. It has also heard extensive testimony about your pattern of behavior, the fraud, the manipulation, the violence, the complete disregard for anyone but yourself. She paused. You are an intelligent man. You had every advantage, and you used those advantages to hurt people, to steal from people, to destroy lives. She opened a folder in front of her. For the financial crimes, this court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison. For the assault charges, this court sentences you to an additional 5 years to be served consecutively. Total sentence, 25 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. The courtroom erupted. Journalists raced for the exits, desperate to file their stories. Investors who had lost money in the fraud applauded openly. Marcus swayed on his feet, his face ashen, the full weight of the sentence finally registering. 25 years. He would be 63 when he was eligible for parole, 68 when he completed his full sentence. His youth, his ambition, his future, all of it erased in a single judicial pronouncement. Judge Chen was not finished. Additionally, the court orders full restitution to all victims of your fraud scheme, to be paid from the liquidation of your assets. Any remaining assets after restitution will be transferred to your former spouse as part of the civil settlement. You will leave this courtroom with nothing but the clothes the state has provided you. She closed her folder with a decisive snap. Court is adjourned. Marcus was led away in chains. He walked past Claire's row close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. He did not look at her. Perhaps he could not bear to. As he disappeared through the side door, Claire felt something release in her chest. Not joy exactly, not triumph, something quieter, something that felt like the end of a very long chapter. It is over, James said quietly. Yes, Claire agreed. It is. 3 weeks later, Claire welcomed her daughter into the world. The baby arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 hours of labor that felt like 3 years, followed by a cry so loud and so insistent that the nurses laughed. She has opinions, one of them said. She gets that from her great-grandmother, Claire replied. The baby weighed 6 pounds, 2 ounces. She had Claire's eyes, gray-blue and serious, and a tuft of dark hair that stuck up in all directions no matter how many times the nurses smoothed it down. According to Margaret, she already had the Hartwell stubbornness evident in the set of her tiny jaw. Claire named her Hope. It seemed appropriate. The day she brought Hope home from the hospital, Claire found a package waiting at her door. Inside was a single photograph and a note in her grandmother's elegant handwriting. The photograph showed Claire at age 4, sitting on Margaret's lap in a garden somewhere. Both of them were laughing at something outside the frame. A bird, perhaps, or a butterfly, or one of the silly jokes that 4-year-olds find hilarious. Claire had no memory of the moment, but looking at it, she could almost feel the warmth of that long-ago afternoon. The note read, "This photograph was taken the summer before everything went wrong. I have kept it on my desk for 30 years, waiting for the day I could give it back to you. Welcome home, my darling girl. Welcome home. All my love, always, grandmother." Claire sat in her new apartment, a brownstone in Back Bay that she had purchased outright with her settlement funds, and cried. Not sad tears, not angry tears, just release, finally, of everything she had been holding for so long. Her brothers visited that evening, bringing takeout from Claire's favorite Italian restaurant and champagne that she could finally drink now that the baby was safely delivered. They sat together in the living room, watching Hope sleep in her bassinet, marveling at the miracle of new life. "So," James said, raising his glass, "what happens now?" Claire considered the question. For 5 years, she had been Marcus's wife. Before that, she had been a struggling designer running from her family's shadow. Before that, she had been a Hartwell, with all the weight and expectation that entailed. Now she was none of those things. Now she was simply Claire, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged, scarred but standing. "I am going to rebuild the interior design business," she said finally, "but differently this time. I want to work with domestic violence shelters, help women who are starting over create spaces that feel safe. I have the resources now. I should use them for something that matters." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Grandmother will love that." "Grandmother already knows. She offered to be my first investor." Claire smiled. "I told her I would think about it." "Will you take it?" "Probably, but on my terms this time. No more letting other people control my narrative." James raised his glass. "To Claire, who turns out to be the toughest Hartwell of all." Daniel raised his as well. "To new beginnings." Claire looked at her brothers, at her sleeping daughter, at the life she had fought so hard to build. She thought about the night she had lain bleeding on a marble floor, believing she might die. She thought about the woman she had been then, trusting, naive, willing to see the best in someone who had no best to offer. She was not that woman anymore. "To second chances," she said, touching her glass to theirs, "and to never needing one again." 6 months later, Claire stood on the balcony of her brownstone, watching the autumn leaves drift down from the old oak tree in the courtyard below. Hope was napping in the nursery, monitored by a baby camera that Claire checked approximately once every 3 minutes, a habit her brothers teased her about mercilessly. The afternoon was quiet, peaceful. 2 words she had once thought she would never associate with her life again. The business was thriving. She had partnered with 3 Boston area shelters to provide design services for their transitional housing programs. Every room she designed was a statement. You deserve beauty. You deserve safety. You deserve a space that reflects your worth. The work was meaningful in ways her previous career had never been. Last month, she had received a letter from a woman named Sarah who had stayed in one of the shelters Claire had redesigned. "I thought I would never feel safe again," Sarah wrote. "Then I walked into that room you created. The colors, the textures, the way the light came through the windows. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Thank you for giving me that." Claire had framed the letter. It hung on her office wall, right next to the photograph of her and Margaret from 30 years ago. Her brothers had returned to their own lives, Daniel to the security operations of Hartwell Maritime, James to his legal practice in New York. But they visited often, more often than they had before any of this happened. The crisis had reforged their relationship into something stronger, something unbreakable. Margaret called every Sunday evening, pretending it was about business, actually wanting to hear about Hope's latest developments. Last week, Hope had rolled over for the first time. Margaret had demanded video evidence, then watched it approximately 15 times while pretending she was merely verifying the accomplishment. The reconciliation was still tentative, still navigating 10 years of complicated history, but it was real. They were building something new on the foundations of something old. Claire had started seeing a therapist, something she probably should have done years earlier. The sessions were hard, excavating wounds she had tried to bury, examining patterns she had never wanted to acknowledge. Why had she been drawn to Marcus? Why had she ignored so many warning signs? What was it about her that had made her vulnerable to manipulation? The answers were painful but necessary. Week by week, she was learning to trust her own judgment again, learning to recognize red flags, learning that her instincts had been right all along. She had simply been too afraid to listen to them. Marcus had been in prison for 5 months now. Claire did not think about him much anymore. He existed in the past, a cautionary tale she would someday tell Hope when she was old enough to understand. The marks he had left on Claire's body had faded completely. The marks he had left on her soul were fading too, slowly but surely. She had heard through James that Marcus was struggling in prison. Not physically, he was kept in a minimum security facility with other white-collar criminals. But psychologically, the loss of control, the loss of status, the loss of everything he had built. Apparently, he spent most of his time alone in his cell staring at the wall. Claire felt nothing when she heard this. Not satisfaction, not pity, just nothing. He had become irrelevant to her. A closed chapter, a book she never intended to open again. Sierra had been released after 3 years with good behavior. Claire had no idea where she was now, and she did not care to find out. The last she had heard, Sierra's baby had been born healthy, a boy, being raised by Sierra's mother while Sierra completed her sentence. The baby's father, David Chen, had fled the country to avoid prosecution. Some people, Claire reflected, got exactly what they deserved. The doorbell rang, pulling Claire from her thoughts. She checked the baby monitor, Hope still sleeping peacefully, and went to answer it. A man stood on her doorstep, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. He held a roll of blueprints under one arm and a bouquet of sunflowers in the other. "Mr. Hartwell?" he asked. "I hope I am not too early." Claire smiled. "Right on time. Please come in." Thomas Bennett had been coming to her brownstone every week for the past 3 months. What had started as meetings about the children's hospital wing Margaret was endowing had evolved into something else. Something neither of them had planned or expected. Their first dinner had led to a second. The second had led to a third. Now they were seeing each other regularly, and Claire was surprised to discover that she was happy. Not the desperate, anxious happiness of her marriage to Marcus. Something calmer, something that felt like it might actually last. "I brought these for you," Thomas said, offering the sunflowers. "I remembered you said they were your favorite." "You remembered that from one conversation 3 months ago?" "I remember everything you say." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Is that weird?" "That is probably weird." "It is a little weird," Claire admitted, "but it is also very sweet." She led him to the kitchen, finding a vase for the flowers while he spread his blueprints on the island. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, reviewing plans, making notes, talking about architecture and design and all the ways they could make the hospital wing a place of healing. But today, Thomas seemed distracted. He kept glancing at Claire, then looking away. He fidgeted with his pencil. He started sentences and did not finish them. "Is everything okay?" Claire asked. "Yes, no, I do not know." Thomas set down his pencil and took a breath. "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I am probably going to do it badly because I have been rehearsing it in my head for a week, and I still have not figured out the right words." Claire felt her heart rate increase. "Okay. I know what you went through. I know you have every reason to be careful, to protect yourself, to never trust anyone again." He met her eyes directly. "But I also know that the past year has been the happiest of my life." And I know that every time I leave this brownstone, I spend the whole drive home counting the hours until I can see you again. Thomas, let me finish, please. He took another breath. I am not asking for forever. I know that is too much, too soon. But I am asking for a chance, a real chance, to show you that not everyone is Marcus, that some people mean what they say, that some people actually want to build something together, not tear someone down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Claire's breath caught. This is not an engagement ring, Thomas said quickly. It is too early for that. This is, I do not know what to call it. A promise ring, this is getting serious ring. A please let me take you to dinner tomorrow night ring? He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band with a small sapphire, Claire's birthstone. I had it made, Thomas said. The sapphire is from a ring my grandmother left me. I do not know what I thought. I just wanted you to have something that mattered to me. Claire looked at the ring. She looked at Thomas. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the ways this could go wrong, all the fears that still woke her up at 3 in the morning. Then she thought about the past 3 months, the laughter, the conversations, the way Thomas looked at her like she was the most remarkable thing he had ever seen, the way he never pushed, never pressured, never made her feel anything less than completely in control of her own choices. The old Claire would have said no automatically. The old Claire would have been too afraid, too wounded, too convinced that trusting anyone was a mistake she could not afford to make. But she was not the old Claire anymore. Yes, she said. Thomas blinked. Yes? Yes, I will wear your this is getting serious ring. Yes, you can take me to dinner tomorrow night. Yes, I want to give this a real chance. Thomas's face transformed with a smile so genuine it made Claire's heart ache in the best possible way. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, because of course he had found a way to figure out her ring size without asking. And then he pulled her into a kiss that tasted like sunflowers and new beginnings. From the nursery, Hope began to cry. The moment broke, both of them laughing. Perfect timing, Claire said. I should probably meet her officially, Thomas said. I mean, if this is getting serious. Claire took his hand. Come on, but be warned. She has strong opinions about strangers. She gets that from her mother, I assume. She gets that from her great-grandmother. All the women in this family have strong opinions. They walked to the nursery together. Claire lifted Hope from her crib, settling the warm weight of her daughter against her shoulder. Hope studied Thomas with serious gray-blue eyes, assessing this new person who had entered her territory. Thomas waved awkwardly. Hi, Hope. I am Thomas. I do not know what I am yet, but I am hoping to stick around and find out. Hope considered this for a long moment. Then she reached out one tiny hand and grabbed Thomas's finger with surprising strength. I think that is approval, Claire said. I will take it. They stood there together, the three of them, in the soft light of the nursery. Outside, the autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. A new night was coming, but for the first time in as long as she could remember, Claire was not afraid of the dark. She knew now what she was capable of. She knew what she was worth. And she knew that whatever came next, whatever joys or sorrows or challenges awaited, she would face them standing tall. Because she was Claire Elizabeth Hartwell. She had survived the worst a man could do to her. She had rebuilt her life from ashes. She had found her family again, and maybe, just maybe, she was finding love again too. Nothing would ever break her. The rocking chair in the corner waited. The room was warm. The house was quiet. And somewhere in the growing dusk, a future was waiting to be claimed. All she had to do was reach for it, and this time she would.